Hi. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. How much of your self-worth has been shaped by the way you look? I know it's a heavy question. But if you're anything like me, or honestly like most of us, the answer might be more than you'd like to admit. This video isn't about makeup tutorials or beauty trends. It's about the dark, often hidden history behind our obsession with beauty, the pain we're taught to accept, the rules we're pressured to follow, and the industries that profit from our insecurities. From ancient rituals to modern marketing, from bone-crushing corsets to billion-dollar bleaching creams, this is a story about control and the price we've paid for it. Welcome to True Crime Echoes, and welcome to the truth behind beauty. Chapter 1. Beauty is pain, or so they say. Do you ever stop and think about how far we'll go to be considered beautiful? I do, all the time. It starts off simple, right? Maybe it's a haircut, some eyeliner. Then suddenly one day you're holding your breath while squeezing into shapewear so tight it feels like a medieval punishment device. And for what a snatched waist and no visible belly line under a dress you're only wearing for 2 hours. You've probably heard that phrase, beauty is pain. People throw it around all the time, almost like it's a joke. But if you really stop to think about it, it's kind of horrifying. Like, why have we just accepted that looking good is supposed to hurt? I remember watching that show, The Swan, back in the early 2000s. Do you remember that one? They would take these women, label them as ugly ducklings, and put them through months of surgeries, therapy, workouts. Everything. They'd cut them open, reshape their faces, suck fat out, put implants in. And at the end, we'd all gather around the TV and watch the big reveal. The audience would cry. The contestants would cry. And I remember thinking, is this empowerment or is it something else? The message was clear: your worth increases with your beauty. And beauty is something you buy, even if it costs you blood, pain, and pieces of your body. That show isn't on anymore, but the idea still lives on. It's in our ads. Our social media feeds our teenage years, when we're told to sit like a lady, smile more, or maybe try losing a few pounds. It's in the beauty products that promise miracles and the influencers who swear this new serum will finally fix your face. But the truth is, the idea that beauty is painful didn't start with reality TV. Not even close. It goes back hundreds, thousands of years, across cultures and generations. And when I started digging into it, really digging, what I found was heartbreaking, fascinating, and honestly kind of infuriating. There's a long, dark history behind our beauty standards, from crushed bones and broken bodies to women who literally reshaped themselves to survive in a society that told them you're only valuable if you're pretty enough. And that's what we're getting into today. Because if we're going to talk about beauty, we have to talk about pain, real pain, systemic pain. And we need to ask ourselves, have we really come that far? Or are we still living in a world that just hides the blade a little better? Let's go back, way back, to the beginning. Let's talk about feet. Chapter 2, The Lotus Feet. When Beauty Broke the Body. When I first learned about foot binding, I didn't really understand it. I think I saw a photo in a history textbook back in high school. There was a small caption, something vague about ancient Chinese beauty standards, and an image of a foot that didn't look like a foot. It looked like something folded, something crushed, something that hurt just looking at it. But we moved on. The teacher skipped ahead. No one really paused to ask what happened to that woman. What did it feel like? Why did she do it? Years later, late one night, I found myself falling down a rabbit hole online, as we all do, and I ended up there again. That same image, that same foot. Only this time I couldn't look away. Because foot binding wasn't just some strange old custom. It was a system, a brutal, deliberate reshaping of the female body. And it was done in the name of beauty. It started during the Tang Dynasty in China around the 10th century. And like many traditions that spread, it began with the elite. There was an emperor, Li Yu, who, according to historical records, was completely obsessed with one of his concubines. Her name was Yao Niang. She was a dancer. He had this ornate golden lotus stage built 6 feet high, encrusted with gems, and he made her perform on top of it. But there was a catch. She had to dance with her feet bound in white silk so they would appear smaller, delicate, crescent-shaped. The legend says her performance was so graceful, so otherworldly, that women across the empire wanted to imitate her. They saw the way the emperor adored her. They saw what tiny broken feet could earn. And so it began. Upper-class families started binding their daughters' feet. At first, it was a choice. Then, it became a standard. Eventually, it became a requirement. The goal was something called the Golden Lotus, a foot no longer than 3 inches. Imagine that. 3 inches. That's smaller than a credit card. That was the ideal. That was the dream. But to get there, it wasn't just about wrapping feet tightly. It was about breaking them. Girls, usually between the ages of 4 and 9, would have their feet soaked in warm water or animal blood to soften the bones. Then the toes, except for the big toe, would be bent downward until they broke, one by one. After that, the arch of the foot would be crushed, and the whole foot folded in half heel to toe, then tightly bound with cloth. The bindings would be changed regularly, pulled tighter each time. And this wasn't done in a hospital. There was no anesthesia. No antibiotics. Just mothers, grandmothers, and pain. Bones snapped. Toenails grew into flesh. Infections set in. Some girls lost toes, some lost feet, some died. But if you survived, if your feet healed into those desired stumps, you had a chance at a better life, a rich marriage, a respected family, status. Foot binding became a currency, a trade-off. And it wasn't just about beauty. It was about control. Sea-bound feet made it nearly impossible for a woman to walk normally. Steps became small swaying. She couldn't run. She couldn't flee. She relied on others for everything. And that was the point. Because a woman who couldn't move, couldn't rebel, she couldn't leave, she belonged to her family, to her husband, to society. Her worth was measured in how gracefully she suffered. There's a Chinese saying from that era that goes, "If you love your son, teach him well. If you love your daughter, bind her feet." It sounds poetic, but it's terrifying. The irony is, women did this to other women. Mothers bound their daughters. Grandmothers supervised. It was an act of love, they believed. A sacrifice to help the girl survive in a world that demanded she be small physically and socially. And it worked. Foot binding became so normalized that by the 1800s it's estimated that over 50% of Chinese women had bound feet. In wealthier classes, that number climbed to nearly 100%. But not everyone accepted it. Some Chinese reformers spoke out against the practice. When Western doctors arrived in China, they were horrified. One doctor described a girl whose bandages had been left on too long. When they were removed, her feet were only attached by the tendons. By the late 19th century, anti-foot binding societies began to form. In 1912, the practice was officially banned in the Republic of China. But even then, it didn't stop overnight. Some families continued it in secret. Some girls still had their feet bound into the 1930s, even into the 1940s. And here's something that really hit me. The last factory that made lotus shoes, those tiny curved slippers for bound feet, didn't close until 1999. Let that sink in. There are women alive today who still carry that pain in their bodies, who still walk on crushed bones, who remember what it felt like to be 4 years old and have your body reshaped without your consent. And yet, some of those women look back on it without bitterness. There was a photographer, Joe Farrell, who spent over a decade photographing surviving women with bound feet. Many of them, she said, smiled when they showed her their feet. They were proud, not of the pain, but of what they endured, what it meant in their time, how it helped them survive. It's complicated, isn't it? Because when we look back at things like foot binding, it's easy to say, that's barbaric, that's wrong. And it is wrong. But it's also more than that. It was a reflection of the world those women lived in. A world that taught them their value, came from being desirable, obedient, beautiful by someone else's definition. And when I think about it, maybe it's not as ancient as we like to believe. We may not be binding feet anymore. But we still reshape ourselves. We still shrink to fit. We still pay in pain, whether it's under the knife, under the scale, or under the pressure of impossible standards. The question is, are we finally ready to stop, or are we still dancing on our own version of the Golden Lotus stage? Chapter 3: Tight Laces and Bra Straps, the Shape of Control. After learning about foot binding, I thought that has to be one of the most extreme things women have ever gone through for beauty. But then I remembered something else, something closer to home, something Western, something that many of us still romanticize: corsets. We see them in period dramas and fashion magazines, elegant, lace-trimmed, often worn with that soft glow of candlelight. But what those images don't show is how tightly women had to be pulled in, how their ribs were compressed, how their organs were literally shifted to create that perfect hourglass figure. And I'm not exaggerating. They actually measured it. For centuries, corsets were the standard undergarment for women in Europe. From the Renaissance to the Victorian era, and even into the early 20th century, corsets shaped not just a woman's body, but her place in society. A small waist meant you were refined, feminine, desirable, and more importantly, controlled. It wasn't just fashion, it was structure, expectation, and it started young. Girls would begin wearing corsets even before they hit puberty. The idea was to mold the body early before the bones set. If you start squeezing a tree while it's still growing, you can change its shape. That was the logic, and it worked physically at least. A woman's waist could be cinched down to 18 inches, sometimes smaller. That's less than the circumference of some people's necks. Her bust would be pushed upward, her hips rounded outward, and her stomach flattened into submission. And for what to appear delicate? To look like someone who didn't labor. Someone who had people to carry her bags, fetch her tea lace, her up in the morning. Because here's the thing, they weren't putting these corsets on alone. You couldn't. The tightest lacing required another person. A maid usually, or a mother. Which meant wearing one wasn't just a beauty choice, it was a class symbol. If you had help, you had money. If you had money, you had power. But you also had pressure. Because if you were rich and didn't look the part, you were ridiculed, dismissed, rejected. It's always a game of appearances. But let's talk about what was really happening inside those corsets. Doctors in the 1800s began documenting the effects. Internal organs were displaced: lungs, compressed ribs, bent inward, digestion impaired. Women often fainted, not because they were dainty, but because they literally couldn't breathe. Fainting couches weren't just decorative, they were necessary. And yet, the corset remained. It became the symbol of ideal femininity. Strong spine, small waist, soft curves. It was never about comfort. It was about control of the body, of behavior, of perception. What's wild is how long this ideal lasted. Even when women started working outside the home, even during war, corsets held on. Until one woman had enough. Her name was Mary Phelps Jacob. And in 1913, she was just trying to get dressed for a fancy ball. She put on her dress, beautiful, sheer, and light, and realized with horror that her stiff whalebone corset was totally visible underneath. The boxy shape ruined the whole look. The dress needed flow, not armor. So Mary panicked. She called her maid, grabbed 2 silk handkerchiefs and some pink ribbon, and started improvising. Together they stitched something lightweight. Something that covered her chest, but didn't constrict her. Something soft, movable, comfortable. And just like that, the modern bra was born. At the time, it didn't even have a name. But that night at the party, other women noticed. They could see how freely Mary moved, how smooth her silhouette looked under the dress. And they wanted in. Soon after, Mary patented her invention under the name backless brassiere. And although it didn't take off immediately, it planted the seed. The corset was on its way out. But here's the twist: Mary's invention didn't make her rich. She ended up selling the patent to the Warner Brothers Corset Company for $500. They took it, ran with it, made millions. By the time World War I broke out, bras were suddenly more than just a fashion alternative, they were patriotic. No, seriously. In 1917, the U.S. War Industries Board urged women to stop buying corsets. Why? Because corsets were made with metal, and that metal was needed for battleships and ammunition. By ditching corsets, American women were contributing to the war effort. It was a strange moment in history where liberation and practicality collided, and women never really went back. Bras took over. They evolved. They got straps cups, elasticity. They became functional, but also just as burdened with expectation. Because once again, women's bodies were being shaped to meet someone else's ideal. Flat-chested. Here's a padded bra. Too busty. Here's a minimizer. Want lift, roundness, cleavage control. There's a bra for that too, and every time it comes with rules, don't let your straps show. Don't sag. Don't bounce. Don't offend. Be supported, but not obvious. It's exhausting. And just like corsets, bras became a symbol of progress, sure, but also of pressure. What started as an act of rebellion, Mary's invention eventually became another form of conformity, because even when the cage is softer, it's still a cage. Now, I'm not saying bras are evil. I wear them. You probably do too. But I think it's important to recognize the legacy behind them, the why behind the what. Because so much of what we do in the name of beauty didn't start with us. It started with what we were told we had to be: small, smooth, symmetrical, supported, controlled. And it makes me wonder if we had never been told to squeeze into these shapes. What would our bodies have looked like naturally? What would our standards be if they weren't built around discomfort? Sometimes I look back at photos of Victorian women cinched tight, smiling for the camera, and I wonder, did it hurt that day? Could she breathe? Was she dizzy? Or did she think like so many of us do? This is just what it takes to be beautiful? That thought, it's haunting. Because when pain becomes part of the ritual, we stop questioning it. We just accept it. We pass it down. And before long, it's no longer a choice, it's tradition. And sometimes tradition is just the same old prison dressed up prettier. Chapter 4, Smooth Skin. Sharp rules, a hairy history. You know, I can't even remember when I first started shaving. It wasn't some huge moment. No big milestone. Just one day I looked down at my legs in gym class and felt embarrassed. Like this isn't okay. This isn't what girls are supposed to look like. I didn't question it. I just picked up a razor and started scraping it all away. But looking back now, I wish I'd stopped to ask, why was I so sure body hair was wrong? Why had I never seen a woman with hairy legs or armpits outside of some punchline or stereotype? The truth is the relationship between beauty and body hair goes back way further than a pink razor in a drugstore aisle. It's ancient, it's complicated, and it's almost always tied to power. Let's start with ancient Egypt. In Egyptian culture, hairlessness wasn't just about beauty, it was about status, purity, and ritual. Pharaoh's priests and the elite would remove all the hair from their bodies, yes, all of it, head to toe, men and women alike. They used things like pumice stones, tweezers made from seashells, and a kind of sugar wax paste, very similar to what's still used in salons today. Being hairless meant being clean, civilized, and closer to the gods. Body hair, on the other hand, was considered animalistic, unrefined. So if you had it and couldn't afford to remove it, that told people something about your place in society. Over in ancient Greece and Rome, the same ideas carried over. Female statues were sculpted with perfectly smooth, flawless skin, no hair in sight. Women of status were expected to remove pubic hair, especially because that was seen as more modest, more feminine. In contrast, body hair was often associated with barbarism, or with lower-class women, or get this, with prostitutes. And let's just sit with that for a second. From the beginning, the presence or absence of body hair wasn't just aesthetic, it was moral. You were judged for what grew naturally on your body. But then came the Middle Ages, and suddenly, modesty was everything. People weren't obsessed with removing hair anymore because even talking about the body, especially the female body, was taboo. Nakedness was sinful, and so was vanity. So for a few hundred years, women mostly kept things under wraps. Literally. But of course, beauty standards are never static. They just evolve with the culture. By the time we reached the Elizabethan era, hair removal made a comeback, but not in the way you might think. Instead of shaving legs or underarms, women would pluck their eyebrows and even their hairlines. Yes, their hairlines, because a high forehead was considered a sign of intelligence and nobility. Some women even used vinegar or harsh chemicals to burn the hair off their foreheads to achieve the look. That's the thing about beauty, the rules are always changing, but the pain somehow stays the same. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and this is where things get familiar, especially in the US. Before the 1900s, most American women didn't shave, it just wasn't expected. Fashion covered the body, sleeves were long, skirts went to the floor, and armpits. No one was really seeing those. But then in 1915, Harper's Bazaar published an ad that would quietly reshape history. It featured a woman in a sleeveless gown, arms raised confidently, and underneath the image were the words, "Summer dress and modern dancing combined to make needless underarm hair objectionable." Just like that, the idea was planted. Hair was no longer invisible. It was a problem. And guess who jumped on it immediately? Razor companies. Up until then, safety razors were marketed to men. But once women's bodies became part of the conversation, the industry saw a golden opportunity. Pink razors, flowery packaging, soft pastel ads, all promising women that being hairless wasn't just attractive, it was essential. Clean, proper, feminine. Leg hair, armpit hair, bikini lines. The targets multiplied. And the message was always the same. If you care about how you look, you'll take care of this. If you don't, well, maybe you're not a real woman after all. By the 1940s, during World War II, stockings became scarce because of wartime rationing. So, what did women do? They shaved their legs and drew seams down the back with eyeliner to fake the look of stockings. It wasn't just about style anymore. It was about keeping up appearances, about doing your patriotic duty to look polished even in a time of crisis. And this wasn't just happening in the US. Across the world, the standard spread. Hollywood reinforced it. Magazines codified it. By the time the 50s and 60s rolled around, the image of the smooth, hairless woman was set in stone. But here's what gets me. No one told me why I was shaving, or that there had ever been a time when women didn't, or that other cultures had different views entirely. Some cultures actually celebrated body hair. In certain parts of the world, like ancient Persia or India, body hair was connected to fertility and maturity. It wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was natural, even sacred in some contexts. But those narratives were drowned out by a global beauty ideal that became whiter, thinner, smoother, and more sanitized over time. And now we're in this weird space where hair removal is technically a choice, but sure, we can say it's empowering to wax or shave or laser it off. And sometimes it does feel empowering because we're doing it for ourselves, right? But when you grow up never seeing unshaven legs on TV, never seeing armpit hair in ads, and being told since puberty that hair equals dirty or lazy or masculine, is that really a free choice? It's like we're born into an invisible contract. One we didn't agree to, but follow anyway. Because the alternative is judgment, rejection, shame. And even now, when women grow out their body hair publicly, it makes headlines. There are debates online. People act like it's some radical rebellion, all for just letting your body exist. That tells you everything you need to know. So, yeah, I still shave sometimes, out of habit, out of comfort, out of programming. But now at least I know where it comes from. And knowing lets me question it. It lets me truly choose what I want to do with my body and not just what's been expected of it. Because beauty in its truest form shouldn't come with shame, or pain, or invisible rules that only benefit someone else's idea of what we should be. Sometimes the most rebellious thing we can do is nothing at all. Chapter 5. Bleach, Burn, and Dye. The Dark Side of Hair Color. I don't think I ever questioned it the way we tie identity to hair color. Blondes are fun, redheads are fiery, brunettes are smart, gray hair, that means you've given up. It's kind of wild when you think about it. How something as simple as the shade of your hair can shape how people treat you or how you see yourself. I remember the first time I dyed my hair. I was maybe 14. It was this box of drugstore black dye that promised to turn me into some gothic, mysterious version of myself. And honestly, I felt powerful. Like I had control over something. like I was becoming someone. But no one told me how deep that history went, or how for centuries, hair dye wasn't just a beauty product, it was a chemical gamble. Sometimes literally deadly. Let's rewind. The obsession with changing hair color goes way back. As far back as ancient Rome, actually. Romans had this whole cultural hierarchy based on hair color. Blonde hair was exotic. It was associated with Germanic and Gaulish slaves. So naturally, Roman women wanted it. They'd bleach their hair with goat fat and beechwood ashes or wear wigs made from the hair of captured women. That's a whole story in itself, right? And while that sounds intense, it was nothing compared to what would come later. By the Middle Ages, things got a little more complicated. Dyeing your hair became associated with vanity, and vanity was a sin. So it went underground. People still did it, of course, but quietly, secretly, and often with homemade concoctions made from things like lye lead or sulfur, not exactly FDA approved. Then came the Renaissance, and suddenly hair color was back in fashion. Venetian women especially were known for this ritual of sitting in the sun, with their hair combed over wide-brimmed hats, applying a mix of alum sulfur and urine to bleach it blonde. Yes, urine. Beauty has never been clean. That's something I keep learning over and over again. But the real danger didn't peak until the 19th and early 20th century when science met beauty and not in a good way. This was the age of industrialization, and with it came new, synthetic chemicals, dyes that promised longer-lasting, more dramatic results. And the star ingredient, something called paraphenyllenediamine, or PPD. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's still used in many permanent hair dyes today. But back then it was practically unregulated, and in some cases, it killed people. One of the earliest and most tragic cases happened in France in the early 1900s. A young woman reportedly died after dyeing her hair black with a product containing PPD. Her scalp became inflamed, her lymph nodes swelled, her throat closed, and she suffocated. Doctors later found that she'd had an acute allergic reaction, what we now call anaphylaxis. But at the time, no one really understood how dangerous these dyes could be. There were warnings, sure, a few doctors raised alarms. But the beauty industry wasn't listening. They were too busy advertising miracle transformations, dark, glossy, permanent color in just one application, and women understandably were drawn in. Because here's the thing, changing your hair color was never just about looking good. It was about reinvention, power, escape. Think about the flappers of the 1920s. Bold red lips, sleek bob cuts, jet black hair. These women were breaking away from tradition, rebelling against Victorian ideals, and their hair was part of that statement. Or the Hollywood starlets of the 1950s. Marilyn Monroe went blonde and became an icon. Lucille Ball dyed her hair a fiery red and built a comedic empire. Even today, celebrities are constantly changing their hair color, not just for fashion, but to signal something. A new era, a rebrand, a message. But while the glam side of hair dye was front and center, the dangers were often swept under the rug. PPD didn't just cause allergic reactions, it could cause chemical, burns, scalp, blistering permanent sensitivity, and in rare cases, organ failure. Even today, people have ended up in the hospital or worse after using hair dye they thought was harmless, especially those black henna dyes sold at markets or festivals. Many of them contain dangerously high levels of PPD even though they're labeled as natural, and still, we keep dyeing because the pressure doesn't go away, it just shifts. Gray hair. Forget about it. The anti-aging industry has spent billions convincing us that even one silver strand is a crisis. I've watched friends, smart, confident, beautiful women freak out the moment a gray hair pops up, like it's a crack in the armor. But why? Who told us that gray means we're invisible? Who benefits when we're terrified of looking older? Spoiler, it's not us. The beauty industry sells more than just products. It sells fear and then offers a solution. And hair dye is one of the biggest moneymakers of them all. By 2023, the global hair color market was worth over $20 billion. That's not a typo. $20 billion. And here's the wildest part, despite decades of research, Most of the dyes on shelves still use the same base chemicals that they did 50 or even 100 years ago. Yes, there are more natural options now, but permanent, long-lasting color. It usually still comes with a warning label, so we patch test. We ignore the sting. We chase a new version of ourselves, hoping that this shade will be the one that makes us feel whole, beautiful, chosen. And sometimes, it works. I'm not going to lie and say, changing my hair hasn't made me feel powerful. Sometimes it's exactly what I need, a way to say, hey world, I'm still here. I'm still in control. But I also think it's worth remembering what's behind the bottle, the history, the chemicals, the pressure. Because the truth is, dyeing your hair has never been just about hair. It's about transformation, about chasing an ideal that always seems just out of reach. And sometimes that chase comes with a cost. Chapter 6. Toxic Glow, the Radium Beauty Scandal. Have you ever seen something glow in the dark and thought, wow, that's kind of magical, I used to feel that way as a kid? Glow sticks, neon stars on my ceiling. It felt like something from a dream, mysterious, beautiful. But what I didn't know then was that once upon a time, that magical glow was deadly. And for a while, women were told to put it on their faces. Let me take you back to the early 1900s, a time when the world was obsessed with radium. Discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898, radium was seen as this incredible miracle element. It glowed, it gave off heat, it could destroy disease. People called it liquid sunshine. Doctors used it to treat cancer. Scientists believed it had rejuvenating powers. And companies, they saw dollar signs. Radium started showing up everywhere in toothpaste, face creams, soaps, tonics. There were radium suppositories for men's vitality and radium-laced water you could drink to improve your complexion. People actually believed that radiation could make you healthier, that it could make you more beautiful. And at the heart of this glowing obsession were the radium girls. These were young women, some as young as 15, working at factories like the United States Radium Corporation in New Jersey and the Radium Dial Company in Illinois. Their job was to paint the dials of watches, clocks, and instruments with a substance called undark, a radium-based paint that glowed in the dark. They were paid by the dial. It was considered delicate feminine work, perfect for nimble fingers and good eyesight. The company trained the girls to use a method called lip pointing. They dip the tiny brush in paint, shape the bristles to a fine tip using their lips, and then paint the numbers with precision. Dip, lip, paint, repeat, over and over again, all day long. The girls were told it was perfectly safe. Some of them even played with the paint during breaks, painting their nails, their teeth, even their faces before heading out for the night. Imagine glowing under the moonlight. It must have felt like magic. But what they didn't know, what no one told them, was that they were slowly poisoning themselves. Radium, it turns out, doesn't just pass through the body. It stays. It mimics calcium, so it settles into the bones. And once it's there, it starts to destroy from the inside out. At first, the symptoms were small. A toothache, fatigue, a sore jaw. But then came the infections, the bone decay, the horrifying condition known as radium jaw, where the lower jaw literally disintegrates. Teeth would fall out, the skin wouldn't heal. Gaping wounds opened up inside the mouth. Some women lost their entire lower face, and the worst part the companies knew. They had reports, internal documents, medical evidence, but they refused to stop. They insisted the paint was safe, blamed the women's illnesses on poor hygiene or syphilis, and continued hiring more girls to take their place. It was a corporate cover-up of the worst kind, because it wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate deception. One woman, Grace Fryer, decided she wasn't going to die quietly. She filed a lawsuit along with 4 other women, and after years of stalling intimidation and horrific health declines, their case finally went to court in 1928. By then, they were known as the Radium Girls, and their story had made headlines. One by one, they testified. Some so sick they had to be carried into the courtroom on stretchers. One woman's jaw was literally held in place with a scarf so she could speak. It was heartbreaking. and it changed everything. The case led to a massive public outcry. Eventually, it forced the U.S. government to impose stricter worker safety laws, specifically around industrial toxins and radioactive materials. It was one of the first times in American history that workers successfully sued a major corporation for damages caused on the job. But here's what sticks with me. While all this was happening, while women were dying from exposure, radium was still being marketed as a beauty enhancer. Even as late as the 1930s, you could buy Tho Radia, a French line of face creams and powders that proudly advertised their radium content. Posters showed smiling women applying it to their skin, promising a radiant, youthful glow. Radiance? Literally. And sure, those products contained far less radium than what the factory workers were exposed to. But the mindset was the same, that beauty was worth the risk, that if it made you look younger, smoother, more vibrant, it didn't matter what was inside. It didn't matter what it might do to your body 5, 10, 20 years down the line. Just look pretty, glow, be admired. But at what cost? Even after the lawsuits, even after the deaths, the beauty industry didn't stop chasing the next miracle ingredient, no matter how dangerous it was. Lead, arsenic, mercury, radioactive elements, all marketed to women in pretty little jars with promises of transformation. And I can't help but think of the radium girls, not just as victims of corporate greed, but as symbols of something bigger. They trusted what they were told. They believed in the glow. And when their bodies broke down, they were gaslit, shamed, discarded. Just like so many others before and after them. That's the darkest part of this whole story. It's not just about radium, it's about the system that allows pain to be packaged as luxury. That tells women if you suffer quietly, you'll be rewarded. But these women didn't stay quiet. They spoke, they fought, and in doing so, they exposed the truth beneath the glow. And that glow, it wasn't magic, it was poison. Chapter 7. The Cost of Youth. Anti-aging. Myths and the billion-dollar fear of wrinkles. I remember the first time someone told me you're starting to get lines around your eyes. It wasn't even said with malice, just casually, like pointing out I had food on my face or lint on my shirt. But it stayed with me, like really stuck. Suddenly, I couldn't stop seeing them, those little creases, when I smiled or frowned or just existed. I started wondering if other people noticed too, if I looked tired, worn out, old. It was subtle but powerful, like someone had planted a seed, and that seed grew into quiet panic. And I wish I could say I was the only one who felt that way, but I know I'm not. Because somewhere along the way, we were all taught that aging is a problem, something to be fixed, reversed, fought. That wrinkles are a flaw. That gray hair is a red flag. That your value, your relevance has an expiration date. And guess what? That lie? It's incredibly profitable. The anti-aging industry is worth more than $60 billion globally. 60 billion. And it's built almost entirely on fear, the fear of getting older, of becoming invisible, of being left behind. But it didn't start that way. Not exactly. Let's go back a bit. In ancient times, aging was often associated with wisdom. Elders were respected. Wrinkles were signs of survival, of experience, of stories lived. But even back then, there were efforts to maintain youth, especially for women. In ancient Egypt, Cleopatra reportedly bathed in sour milk for its lactic acid, which we now know has exfoliating properties. Roman women used honey and rosewater masks. Chinese empresses used jade rollers. Beauty and youth were intertwined, but not yet weaponized. The real shift came with the rise of Western medicine and consumer capitalism. In the 19th century, aging started being medicalized, framed as something unnatural, even pathological. Doctors and so-called youth specialists began promoting tonics, elixirs, and bizarre treatments to restore vitality. And guess who the target audience was? Women. Always women. The message was clear: your beauty is your currency. And when that fades, so does your worth. By the early 20th century, ads for anti-aging creams and potions exploded. Magazines warned women of crow's feet, marionette lines, and turkey necks. They weren't just pointing out changes, they were assigning shame to them. One ad from the 1920s literally said, "She looks old enough to be his mother." Don't let this happen to you. Can you imagine that kind of messaging seeps into your bones? It makes you question every mirror, every birthday, every smile line. And then came the cosmetic procedures. In 1901, the first recorded facelift was performed in Berlin. A surgeon literally cut and stretched the skin of a Polish aristocrat to give her a more youthful appearance. It was secretive, hush-hush, because vanity was still taboo. But over time, it became more normalized. Botox was approved for cosmetic use in the US in 2002. Fillers, lasers, chemical peels, thread, lifts, microneedling, it's a long, expensive list. And while some people do find empowerment in these procedures, let's be honest, many of us are doing it because we're scared of what happens if we don't. We're scared of becoming the before photo. And that fear doesn't come from nowhere. It's carefully cultivated. Think about it. How often do you see women over 50 in major beauty campaigns? Or actresses in leading roles without a filter, a facelift, or some kind of age-defying disclaimer? Now compare that to men. Silver hair crinkles around the eyes, salt and pepper beards, they're seen as distinguished, sexy wise. But a woman with those same features, she gets told to do something about it. She's told she looks tired, or worse, brave. We're not allowed to age naturally. We're expected to age gracefully, which usually means quietly and visibly and with a credit card. Even the term anti-aging is violent, if you really think about it. Anti, as if aging is the enemy, as if growing older isn't the most human thing we do. And the result, we live in a world where 13-year-old girls are buying retinol, where 20-somethings are getting preventative Botox, where filters blur our features until we don't even recognize ourselves in a photo. And let me be clear, I'm not judging anyone who chooses to use those products or procedures. I've used them too. It's a personal decision, and honestly, sometimes it does feel good to take control, to feel polished, presentable, less fragile. But we have to talk about why we feel that pressure, why we equate beauty with youth and youth with value. And more importantly, who benefits when we feel that way? It's not women. It's corporations. It's the beauty brands that sell us serums for $120 a bottle, even though the active ingredient costs pennies. It's the plastic surgery clinics offering lunchtime facelifts. It's the celebrities who get procedures done but swear they're just drinking celery juice and doing yoga. It's the entire system that profits off our insecurity, off the idea that aging makes us less lovable, less hireable, less visible. But here's the truth. Aging is not a failure. It's not something to erase or hide or battle. It's a privilege, a process, a story written across your skin, those lines on your forehead. They're from raising your eyebrows in surprise, those creases around your mouth, from laughter, from joy, from living. And yet, even as I say that, I know how hard it is to believe, because we've been taught the opposite since we were old enough to read a fashion magazine. Sometimes I look in the mirror and think, should I try that new serum? Should I schedule a consultation? And then I catch myself. Because what if I didn't? What if I just let myself be? What if I chose softness over tightness, grace over shame? What if we all did? What if we stopped treating aging like a crisis and started seeing it as the natural, beautiful evolution that it is? That to me would be the most radical beauty act of all. Chapter 8. Squeeze to Please, Corsets, Waist Trainers, and the War on Women's Bodies. I used to think corsets were just fashion statements. You know, something you'd wear for Halloween or a historical drama look? Lace it up, suck it in, feel snatched for a night. But once I actually wore one for a few hours, something shifted. It wasn't just the discomfort. It was the realization that this thing wasn't designed for me to move freely. It wasn't made for breathing deeply or existing comfortably. It was made to shrink me, to contain me. And that's when I started to wonder, how long have we been squeezing ourselves for approval? Turns out the answer is a very long time. Let's go back to the 16th century, when the corset first entered mainstream European fashion. Back then, it wasn't even called a corset, it was known as a stay, and it was all about shaping the torso into that stiff, upright, almost conical form. The idea was to flatten the bust, narrow the waist, and force the body into a silhouette that said controlled, composed, respectable. And this wasn't optional. Women, especially those of a certain class, were expected to wear them. It was a marker of morality, discipline, and femininity. If you weren't wearing one, you were considered lazy, sloppy, or worse, immoral. But as fashion evolved, so did the corset. By the Victorian era, the focus shifted from flattening the chest to emphasizing the hourglass. That meant tight lacing, like really tight. We've all seen those drawings women with impossibly tiny waists and ballooning skirts. But what those drawings don't show is the cost. Because the tighter the corset, the more damage it did. Medical records from the 1800s show women suffering from compressed organs, displaced livers, deformed rib cages, and difficulty breathing. Some fainted regularly. Others developed chronic digestive issues. There were even rumors, some true, some exaggerated, of broken ribs and punctured lungs. And yet they kept wearing them, not because they wanted to suffer, but because society told them that this was what it meant to be beautiful, to be feminine, to be worthy. And here's the really twisted part: it wasn't just about fashion, it was about control. The corset wasn't just shaping the body, it was shaping behavior. You couldn't slouch in a corset, you couldn't run, or laugh too hard, or eat a full meal without feeling like your lungs were going to collapse. It taught you to take up less space, to stay composed, silent, neat, contained. And as feminism began to rise in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, so did the backlash against corsets. Women began rejecting them as a symbol of patriarchal control. Some literally burned them in protest. But the story didn't end there, because corsets never truly went away. They just evolved. By the 1920s, we had girdles. Then came Spanx. Then waist cinchers. And now waist trainers, those modern-day versions that celebrities post about on Instagram, promising snatched waists and hourglass curves without the pain. Except, that's not true, is it? Because the pain is still there. It's just wrapped in beige microfiber and filtered selfies. I've tried them. Waist trainers, shapewear, the whole package. And I'll admit there's a moment where you put it on, look in the mirror, and feel powerful. Like you finally tamed the part of your body that's always refused to cooperate. But then you sit down, or try to eat, or breathe, and you remember this isn't power, this is pressure. The marketing might have changed, but the message hasn't. Your body as it is not enough. Shrink it, flatten it, hide the bulge, suck it in, and above all, don't complain. And what's worse, we now live in a world where the line between fashion and fitness is completely blurred. Waist trainers are sold as health tools. People wear them to the gym convinced they'll sweat their way to a smaller waistline. There are entire companies built on the lie that compression equals transformation. But science doesn't agree. Doctors have warned for years that these devices don't burn fat. They just redistribute it temporarily and sometimes in damaging ways. They can lead to acid reflux, lower lung capacity, pelvic floor issues, and even long-term muscle weakening. And yet, the pressure is everywhere. Because social media has turned every body into a billboard. We're constantly being shown before and after photos, not realizing that most of the after is padding, posing, or a product. And we buy it. Literally and emotionally. Because we've been trained to chase the ideal even when that ideal is physically impossible. Here's the kicker: the average corseted Victorian woman had more freedom over her image than some of us do today. At least she wasn't being compared to filtered influencers, AI-generated body types, or celebrities with entire teams sculpting their look. Today, the corset isn't just around our waist. It's in our minds. It's in the voice that says, "Don't wear that, you'll look too bloated." Or, maybe skip lunch, you've got that event. It's in the apps that track our calories, the ads that promise flat tummy teas, the comments under celebrity photos dissecting every curve. And honestly, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of squeezing myself to fit into someone else's idea of beauty. I'm tired of mistaking discomfort for discipline. And I'm tired of the quiet suffering we call self-improvement, because our bodies aren't problems to be solved. They're not projects or punishments. They're home. And they deserve to breathe. So maybe it's time we unlace the metaphorical corset. Maybe it's time to stop shrinking and start expanding into ourselves, our truth, our space. Because the war on women's bodies has always been about control. And the most radical thing we can do is take that control back. Chapter 9. Bleach and belonging, skin lightening, colonial beauty, and colorism. When I was a teenager, I remember watching a commercial that stopped me in my tracks. It showed this young woman, probably around my age, walking into a room. She looked shy, overlooked. People barely noticed her. Then cue the music, she starts using this magical face cream. And within a few weeks, her skin was noticeably lighter, glowing almost. Suddenly, people couldn't stop staring. Men smiled. Her boss gave her a promotion. Her life just got better. All because her skin was a few shades lighter. Even then, I remember thinking, is this really what we're teaching people? But that commercial wasn't an outlier. It was, and still is, part of a global pattern. A pattern that equates lighter skin with success, desirability, safety, and darker skin with the opposite, and the consequences. They're not just emotional, they're violent, they're deeply rooted in colonialism, racism, and generational trauma. Let's start with the basics. Skin lightening, also called skin bleaching, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. In countries like India, Nigeria, the Philippines, Jamaica, Thailand, and even communities here in the West, you'll find shelves stocked with creams, soaps, pills, and injections, all promising the same thing: fairer skin. The ingredients vary. Some use hydroquinone, others mercury or corticosteroids. But many of them have one thing in common: they're dangerous. Prolonged use can cause skin thinning, scarring, organ damage, and even cancer, and yet people keep using them. Because sometimes they feel like the only way to survive. But where did this obsession even come from? To understand that, we have to go back to colonialism. When European powers invaded and occupied countries across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, they didn't just take land, they imposed a hierarchy. A very specific one. One where lighter skin meant power, wealth, education. Darker skin meant servitude, poverty, criminality. This system wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Because if you convince people that you are naturally superior, that your features, your complexion, your culture are the ideal, then they'll spend their lives chasing that ideal, even at the expense of their own identity. It's a kind of psychological warfare. And it worked. Centuries later, even after independence movements, even after revolutions, the scars of that ideology remain. They're in schoolyard insults, in dating apps, in job interviews, in wedding ads that say "wanted fair-skinned bride." They're in families where children are told to stay out of the sun so they don't get too dark. They're in homes where sisters are treated differently based on who has the lighter complexion. They're in the mirror every time someone wonders if they'd be more lovable, more successful, more safe, if only their skin were lighter. And what's worse is that this isn't just out there. It's not just other countries, it's everywhere. In the US, colorism is deeply woven into the Black community's experience born out of slavery, where lighter-skinned Black people were often given housework and marginally better treatment, while darker-skinned individuals were sent to the fields. This created internal divisions. It created pain. And that pain has echoed across generations. Think about how media has portrayed beauty for most of the last century. Think of the actresses, the magazine covers, the pop stars. How often were they light-skinned? How often did they have Eurocentric features? Now think about who gets cast as the villain. The maid, the background character. It sends a message. Not directly, not loudly, but consistently. Whiteness is aspirational. Darkness is disposable. And when you hear that message enough times, you start to internalize it, even when you know better, even when you're proud of your heritage, even when you say the right things. Sometimes when you've been told your skin tone is a liability your whole life, it's hard not to believe it. That's what makes this issue so tragic. People don't bleach their skin because they're shallow. They do it because the world has convinced them that lighter is safer. Lighter is employed. Lighter gets the job. Lighter gets the date. Lighter gets the benefit of the doubt. And companies know this. Just like we've seen with corsets and radium creams, the beauty industry sees insecurity and turns it into profit. They slap a label that says brightening or glow enhancing, but what they're selling is the same message: you'll be better when you're whiter. Some of the biggest skincare brands in the world Names you would absolutely recognize have made millions selling fairness products. Some of them have even marketed to children, and even when there's backlash, they're careful. They change the names. Fair and Lovely becomes Glow and Lovely. The ingredients stay the same. The ingredients stay the A. The message stays the same. It's just better disguised. But there are people pushing back. Activists around the world have been calling out these brands, educating communities, and demanding regulation. In some countries like Ghana and Rwanda, governments have banned certain skin bleaching products altogether. And slowly things are changing. Dark-skinned models and actresses are finally being celebrated. Campaigns like Melanin Magic and Unfair and Lovely are reclaiming the narrative. More people are speaking up, sharing their stories, refusing to be erased. But we still have so far to go. Because the truth is, this issue isn't just about beauty. It's about survival, about safety, about who gets to feel seen and loved in their own skin. It's about the deep, psychological cost of living in a world that tells you your natural self is a liability. And that's why we have to talk about it, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because silence allows these messages to live on. But truth is a disinfectant. And maybe, just maybe, if we keep shining that truth on the lies we've inherited, lies about worth and shade and belonging, we can start to heal. We can start to see ourselves and each other clearly. No filters, no bleach, no shame, just skin, human, beautiful, enough. Chapter 10. The Final Mirror, What the Beauty Industry Never Wants Us to Ask. I've spent a long time thinking about beauty, long before I ever started working on this video, even before I had words for it. I was feeling it. That quiet pressure when I walked into a room. The inner dialogue in dressing rooms. The hesitation to post a picture without smoothing something out first. The lingering shame after seeing a candid photo I didn't approve. And I know I'm not alone. We all carry some version of that weight. The belief that our appearance is a problem to solve. A constant work in progress. That somewhere out there there's a version of ourselves that's finally right if we just find the right product, the right diet, the right surgery. But here's the thing. That perfect version of you, it keeps moving. It always moves. Because the industry needs it to. And that's what they never want us to realize. The real crime of the beauty industry is that it was never about beauty. Not really. It was about insecurity, about inventing flaws, manufacturing doubt, and turning that into profit. It was about making sure we never feel finished, so we'll keep spending, keep chasing, keep shrinking ourselves in pursuit of something they never intend for us to actually reach. Because if we ever did reach it, we'd stop buying. And that's bad for business. You can see this pattern everywhere, from the corsets of the 1800s to the Instagram filters of today. From crushed beetles in ancient makeup to retinol serums priced like rent, from ugly duckling TV shows to the teenage girl Googling how to fix my face. The tools may change, the language may soften, but the message, you are not enough. Unless you pay, unless you conform, unless you become smaller, whiter, younger, smoother, thinner, quieter, unless you become someone else. And the saddest part is that most of us don't even question it, because it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's just the way we scroll past people who look too real. Or the way we compliment someone by saying, "You don't look your age." Or how we instinctively choose the lightest foundation shade and never ask ourselves why. It's subtle, insidious, trained into us from the moment we pick up a doll or see our first magazine cover. And yet, at some point, we have to stop and ask ourselves who taught us to hate ourselves this way, who decided that beauty has a single definition, and who benefits when we believe it. I think about the little girls growing up right now, about how early it starts, about the 8-year-olds talking about calories, about teenagers asking for nose jobs for their birthdays, about influencers selling skin bleach under the label of brightening serum. And I wonder what kind of world we're leaving them. Because right now we are still inside the system. We're still trying to fix the mirror instead of looking behind it. We spend so much time and money trying to change our bodies, but almost no time asking why we feel we need to. And I get it. It's hard to question something that's everywhere. It's hard to say I'm enough in a world that makes money when you don't feel that way. But that's what makes this conversation so important. Because if we can't untangle beauty from pain, if we can't separate self-care from self-harm, then we'll just keep repeating the same cycle our mothers did, and our grandmothers, and theirs before them. There's a reason this story has lasted for centuries, because when you control how someone sees themselves, you control everything: their confidence, their relationships, their career choices, their joy, their silence. And maybe that's why it's time to rewrite the story. Not to pretend beauty doesn't matter, because let's be honest, it does. Beauty is powerful. It's cultural, political, emotional. It can be healing, celebratory, fun. But it should never be the price of admission to love, to respect, to opportunity, to safety. So maybe the question we need to ask isn't, how can I be more beautiful? Maybe the better question is, who told me I wasn't already? And what do I gain when I stop believing them? Because when I strip away the marketing, the algorithms, the plastic surgery shows, and the perfectly curated feeds, what I see is this A system that was never built to love us. It was built to use us. But the minute we stop buying the lie, that's the minute it starts to fall apart. That's the moment the mirror cracks. So what if we just walked away? What if we turned off the ad, closed the tab, unfollowed the account? What if we looked at our bodies not as projects, but as proof that we've survived, that we've lived, that we've loved and laughed and cried and aged, proof that we're human? Because that's what beauty really is. It's not something you buy, it's something you own. So, after everything we've uncovered, how do we move forward? I don't think the answer is to throw away every lipstick or boycott every mirror. It's deeper than that. It's about awareness. It's about asking harder questions. It's about learning to see beauty not as a burden or a battleground or a business plan, but as something personal, something we define for ourselves. Because the real crime isn't in wanting to feel beautiful. The crime is that we were taught we had to suffer for it, that we had to earn it, that without it we weren't enough. But maybe enough was never something we had to chase. Maybe it was something we already were. Thank you for being here with me, for sitting with the discomfort, for questioning the story. If this episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing, sharing, or just starting a conversation. That's how we begin to break the cycle together. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and don't let anyone sell you a version of yourself you didn't ask for. This is True Crime Echoes. I'm True Crime Echoes, and I'll see you in the next one.